Hello and welcome to our Project Communication Management webinar. My name is Gus Oliveira and I'm an International Product and Market Manager here at SoftExpert. Today's webinar will be presented by Mrs. Shabnam Suri, who has over 25 years experience in the IT industry, working primarily in the Southeast Asian nations. She has also trained project managers in Europe, the United States, UAE, and Asia, and developed a proprietary project delivery methodology. Ms. Suri has been a certified project management professional since 2002 and Prince 2 certified since 2005.
So let's look at the agenda. I will have a short introduction to project communications management. After that, I'll talk about the communication management processes. But for this webinar, what I'm going to really focus on is planned communications management. So that is the first process in this knowledge area. I'm going to focus on this and talk in detail about some of the inputs, the tools and techniques, and the outputs. Okay, so to begin at the beginning, it is important to understand that actually communications form an integral part of managing your project. If communications fail, then your project will also fail. And if then why? How do you give work assignments? That's communication. How do you report status? That's communication. How do you do any coordination? That's communications. So even though this is a easy knowledge area, please do pay attention to it. You need to understand the importance. And of course, there are many questions that come from this knowledge area in the exam. So what exactly is communications management? And this is the definition that is given in the PMBOK. But it is everything to do with communication, how you create it, how you plan for it, how you distribute it, how you collate it, everything that you do with the information that is exchanged during a project from the beginning to the end till the final when you store that data. All these activities are encompassed within project communications management. And even though it is an easy knowledge area, there is a lot of depth to it. There are different activities, there are different types of communication, there are different methods and technologies. So let's begin with what are the dimensions of communication activities. So what kind of activities? They can either be internal or external. So what does that mean? Internal means within the project. So when you communicate within the project team, then that's one of the dimensions. Or it can be external. You may be communicating outside of the project team to customers, to vendors, with the government, etc. It could be formal or informal. So that's pretty simple to understand. Formal, it's a report, it's maybe minutes of meeting, etc. And then informal, you could just be sending a text message to somebody. Vertical and horizontal. Vertical means up and down. That means up to your to the senior managers, let's say, in the organization, and down maybe to people who report to you. Horizontal refers to communication between peers. Then communication can also be official or unofficial. For example, within a company, if they were publishing their balance sheet or something like that, then obviously it would be official. Otherwise, most communications are unofficial. Communications can also be written or oral. So that's quite simple to understand. Anything written, an email, a memo, etc., and oral is spoken. I do make a differentiation, a further differentiation of the oral actually into verbal and non-verbal. And what does that mean? Verbal refers to the pitch and the tone of your voice. And non-verbal, you'd be surprised. I mean, I had once studied communications. I used to teach a communications management class, and in fact, the words that you speak are much, much less important than the way you say them, the pitch of your voice. And that even that is not as important as your body language when you're communicating with someone. So those are all the things that you have to consider. There are all the different kinds of activities you can have within the communication space. Then there are different communication types. And this is also something we have to think about when we are planning communications. So we could have, these are the 4 major types. Yeah. So you could have formal, written. Do we use this? It's important also to know when we would use this kind of communication. So formal written communication is if you are publishing some important document, obviously it should be, everything should be written down. For example, if you are negotiating a contract, then naturally that's a formal written type of communication. If you had to explain something which is difficult to understand, again, you would use formal written. Formal verbal is a more interactive way of communicating. Informal written, emails, notes, text messages, that's easy to understand. And then informal verbal. So these are the different types of communication one may use. So we looked at the dimensions of communication activities, the different kinds of communication, see some of the communication types. So this is all to give you a kind of introduction to communications, to the importance of communications, to start you thinking of considerations one has to make when you're planning communications. Okay, so that was the introduction. So the next agenda item, I mentioned that I will talk about the communication processes. There are 3 processes in communications management: plan, manage, and control. So plan communications management, of course, I will some detail going forward, but at this point it's enough to say that this belongs to the process group called planning. So whenever you are studying knowledge areas, do always remember to tie the processes back to the process group to which they belong. So plan communications management, of course, falls in the planning process group, and this is where we decide how are we going to handle communications in the project. So everything we intend to do, we must plan first, which, of course, you must have seen in every knowledge area in the PMBOK. That's what happens. We then have manage communications. So what happens after we finish planning? Obviously, we have the communications management plan. And this then goes to manage communications. During manage communications, we are doing the work. So it belongs to the process group called executing. We are actually doing the work. So whatever we plan to do, we are actually carrying that out. And one of the main focus of attention here in managed communications is performance reporting. So here we are creating all those status reports, we are creating forecasting reports, variance reports, etc. Then what we do, of course, project communications, they go to control communications, which belongs to the monitor and control process group. And here what are we doing? We are measuring the effectiveness of our communication processes. So is everything happening according to plan? If we said that weekly status reports have to go out to this group of people, is that happening? Are the stakeholders actually getting the information that they require? So we are monitoring that and we are controlling it, and as an output, usually we may have some change requests. So for example, if we see some stakeholder has been missed, or we notice that the kind of communication that is going to some stakeholder is not effective and they're not getting all the information that they need, then we change the communications management plan. So that's basically the flow of the communication management and knowledge area. Plan, manage, and control. So the third agenda item, and as I said that this is what I'm going to focus on today, is the plan communications management process. In PMBOK, and you will see this in every knowledge area, the emphasis is always on plan, plan, plan. So in each of the knowledge areas we'll find this, And if you run small projects, you might think that what is all this fuss about planning communications and why do we, learn so much about it? But you have to understand that the PMBOK always comes from a place of large projects. So if you had 200 people on a project, they were located in 5 different countries, spoke, 10 different languages, and then you had to communicate and coordinate between all those people. It's not enough to be, you can't just call people in a room and say, okay, do this. Then, that gives you an idea of why planning communications is so important. Because you must always look at it from the perspective of a very large project. So when we are planning communications management, what do we have to think about? We have to think about, of course, who we are sending the information to. So we'll see later that we have to analyze requirements and we have to, identify the stakeholders whose information needs we are trying to fulfill here. So who are we sending it to? And then what are we sending? That means what is the content that we are going to send, in what format, etc. We like to know the frequency. Do we have to send it once a week? Do we have to send something every day? How? We have to think about what are the methods we are going to use, and we'll talk about this a little later in the presentation. What are the models? What are the technology, etc. So we have many things to think about. And ultimately, we have to think that all this communication that we are creating and distributing, where are we going to store this once the project is over? So these are all the things that we need to think about when we are planning communications management. Okay, so here we see the inputs, the tools and techniques, and the outputs of the communications management, of the planned communications management process. As far as the inputs are concerned, what are these? These are major inputs, and I'll talk about them a little bit. The project management plan. The project management plan, of course, is telling us the structure of the project, how it's going to be initiated and executed and controlled, etc. So obviously, invaluable information when we are trying to create the communications management plan. We also need the stakeholder register, the stakeholder management knowledge area. And why do we need this? Ultimately, communications management and stakeholder management is very closely interlinked, because communications is all about fulfilling the information needs of the stakeholders. So obviously the information that is given in the stakeholder register, the name of the stakeholder role, what is their interest in the project, how can they influence the project, what is the position in the company, etc. All this information is essential for us to be able to plan communications properly. We also need the EEF, or the enterprise environmental factors, and this, if you recall, is about the company's organization structure, its culture. And you can easily see that the organization structure of a company is greatly going to influence the way that I actually plan my communications. The organization culture might also influence us, because different organizations have different styles, let's say, and that is very formal. It's formal in the way it asks its employees to dress, it's formal in the way it communicates with each other. We must know this. Finally, the OPA, or the organizational process assets. Now these, as you may recall, is really the assets that the company has built up from previous experience. And in our case, what do we need? What we can greatly benefit from here when we are trying to create the communications management plan, what we need is any historical information, any lessons learned. And how will this help us? If the company has run projects previously, they probably have, then they have accumulated a lot of information about the communication methods that were used, they work well. So instead of making our own mistakes, we can use all this valuable information that the company has collected and collated to make sure that our communications management plan is actually robust and effective. So given all these inputs, we then use certain tools and techniques in order to produce the output. And the output we produce, as you can see, is the communications management plan. And secondary output is that some project documents would need to be updated. For example, if we find that some stakeholder is missing or his role was incorrectly documented earlier, or his information needs are kind of different, then we may have to go back and update the stakeholder register. As concerns the tools and techniques, there are 5 tools and techniques, and we are going in some detail. So the first one is communication requirements analysis. Obviously, it's really important to understand what it is we have to communicate. Because if the information is not of value to the stakeholders and it's not of value to the project, then it's actually useless. So this is what we need to do in the beginning when we're trying to plan our communications. We need to make sure that we really understand the information needs of our stakeholders, and we are able to also assess whether the information that we are sending is of value to the project. Now, it could be that stakeholders want a lot of information, but it's not going to add anything to the conduct of the project. Ultimately, understand that every activity has a cost attached to it. So here, when we are analyzing information needs, we also need to make sure that we are getting value for money, as it were. It is to know how many communication channels there are. This gives him an idea of how complex is the project and how difficult is it going to be to plan communications. It's a simple formula, and you do get asked this in the examination, so please be sure that you can remember it. It is N, you can see it on your screen, and N is the number of stakeholders. I've given you an example which you can also read. If you had 7 stakeholders, you would need 21 communication channels. So you can see that if we are talking about a 200-person project, there will be literally hundreds of communication channels. So you might also ask that does the project manager have to control each and every communication channel? And the answer is no, really, because he can't. However, should he try to? Should he try to control the communications? Should he try to reduce the number of communication channels? Then yes, of course he should try to. So this is the first tool and technique, the first way that we use our inputs to turn them into the output, which is the communications management plan. The next one is communications technology. And technology doesn't only mean the the email and the databases, etc. It also means meetings or documents, any way in which you communicate. And when we are choosing a communications technology, when we are planning our communications, we have to look at all these different factors that I've included here. How urgent is the information? For example, if the information is very urgent, then obviously I'm not going to write a 6-page report. I'm going to pick up the phone and I'm going to just give whatever information is required. So the technology that you use is very much impacted by the urgency of the information, by the frequency. Again, if I have to provide an update every hour, it's unlikely to be a 1-page or a 5-page written document. It's going to probably be a couple of lines. And then it could be that there are different formats that are requested or required by stakeholders. So I have to consider that. Then I have to consider, is the technology that I want to use, is it available? Companies are different. Organizations may have different availability or different equipment, etc. So I have to see what is available that I can use. Thirdly, we have to see how easy is it to use. ultimately, we want to make sure that we can provide information that our communications are easy to access and easy to understand. We also need to consider the project environment. I had a project, I've had many projects which were multi-country projects. And some of those projects were in, let's say, Africa. So in Africa, somehow at the client side, you wouldn't have very good internet access. So if I sent all my communications, I put everything on the internet, and then I expected all my consultants and my project team to download that, that wouldn't be a very effective way of communicating, would it? If the project was in, let's say, in a country where internet access is not available. So that's what project environment means. You have to make sure that you are considering whether you have different time zones or languages or culture or availability of technology, etc. Again, if I was speaking to people in different languages, who spoke different languages, then maybe I need to change the way that I communicate. You use simpler English, you use simpler sentences, don't use jargon, don't use slang. And I think IT people love to use slang, so that's something I know that one needs to guard against. And then lastly, you have to also consider the sensitivity or the confidentiality. Obviously, I shouldn't put on the internet without any password, financial information, let's say, which is not actually public. So we need to take all these aspects into consideration when we are planning our communications management plan. We also need to think about communications models. Now, there are different models, but the one that is most popular and the one that Tomborg refers to is the Shannon-Weaver model of. It looks like a simple model, but actually there is some depth to it. So what should you be familiar with? You should be familiar with, there is a sender, of course, this is the person who's sending the message, and there is the receiving the message, obviously. But given that we don't have any brain-to-brain transmission, we do need to encode the message. That means we have to put it into words so that in a format that we are able to transmit across a channel. So a communication channel or a communication medium is the way that we send our message across. So as I already mentioned, it could be telephone, it could be email, it could be text message. So when it's received by the receiver, he will then encode it. So you wrote something, he's reading it, and then he's understanding it. And once he's understood it, then he will give some feedback. But there are many things that can interfere with communication. And I'm sure all of you at some point in your life have sent a message or an email which has been wrongly interpreted. And this kind of thing happens more often than you can imagine. Because there are many, many factors that cause what is called noise. So when you send a message, it doesn't mean that it's always completely understood the way you wanted it to be understood. Now this could be because of a large number of factors. It could really be noisy surroundings, really. So naturally, if I give you a call and then somebody is playing drums in the background, you're not really going to understand my message very well. But that's a simplistic view of what noise is. Actually, there are many other factors. If I'm speaking to somebody in English and English is not their first language, then maybe they don't understand some of the words I used or the slang which I was referring to a few minutes ago. So that could impact the way that my message is received and understood. different cultures, they have a different way of thinking. So they may interpret your messages, through that filter. So there are many different reasons and many factors that make up this noise. And the best way to overcome this noise is really to encourage feedback. Because if you send a message and then you get proper feedback, then you can understand. Did you understand what I was saying? So then if not, then you can clarify. And you can make sure that your message is well received, and so there is no misunderstanding. So simple model, however, do make sure that you understand it. So going on to the next tool and technique, we have 3 major communication methods. There is the interactive, that means that we are in a position where we can get immediate feedback. So we could be face to face, could be one-to-one, or we could be doing some kind of presentation so that people could still ask questions. So you get immediate feedback and immediate requests for clarifications. Now, if I could see you, then I would know from your expressions whether you're getting really bored. Unfortunately, I can't actually do that. But obviously, the most effective way of communicating is face-to-face, where immediate feedback is available. However, at the end of the session, you will get a chance to ask questions. So we can still consider that this is a good way of communicating, and it is interactive. Now, we also have what is called push communication. Now, in push communication, email is a good example. You are sending out something to a group of people. So, or you could have a printed report and then you are sending it out to 10 members of the steering committee, for example. So that is called push communication. And lastly, we have a communication method that is called pull. Now, pull is usually used when you're trying to send some information to very large groups of people. So if I wanted to send a message to the entire organization, I don't think I would be sending them emails. Neither am I able to call them all and tell them face to face. So then I would put the information that I want to communicate in some central site. So I could put it on the company's intranet, for example. Or if they had some kind of document repository like SharePoint, then I would put it there. And then anyone who is interested in that information has to pull it from that central location. So you need to just give this some thought and think about which is the best way of communicating given the scenario. So in the exam, they will have scenario questions and they might ask you which method of communication is most appropriate. Most effective is obviously interactive, but it works better with smaller groups of people. And pull is, I don't know whether they have received it or not, whether did anybody actually, or the SharePoint site, and actually get that information. So I have no feedback. So that way, that is the downside. But on the other hand, it's the only way to communicate to large groups of people information that is non-urgent in nature. So you need to think about all those factors of urgency, etc., confidentiality, when you are choosing your communication method. Then the last tool and technique in planned communications management is our meetings. So now, why do we have meetings in this process? There are 2 reasons why we have why we hold meetings in this planned communications management process. We need to discuss with our peers, with other members of the project team, how are we going to communicate. So remember that this is part of planning. So we will be chatting with them we will be discussing with them what is the best way communication technology to use, what method to use, etc. And then we will also plan when we are going to hold meetings during the life of the project. That is also part of this plan communications management. Are we going to have weekly meetings for, for status reporting? Are we going to have monthly steering committee meetings? What other kinds of meetings are we going to have? Are we going to have any brainstorming? All this also needs to be planned at this time. Now, I assume all of you run projects, and then you know how many meetings usually happen during the life of a project. And sometimes they're really a waste of time. So it's important, it does come in the exam, you should understand what are the rules of a good meeting. And I've listed some of them for you here. Yeah. Don't just call a meeting, ad hoc meeting. Plan it, think about it first. Treat a meeting like a mini project. So if you treat a meeting like a mini project, then you will plan it first, only then you'll do it, and then you'll have some kind of closure also to it. So you must make sure people's time is precious. So make sure that you start your meeting and you end it on time. Make sure you let people know in advance. Make sure that they understand what are the goals of this meeting. What do you hope to achieve? There must be somebody to ensure that we are actually discussing the right things. You know, when a group of people get together and they start talking, and especially if they're passionate about the subject matter, then they can, the meeting can run away with them. So there has to be somebody, a chairperson, who kind of holds the discussion and make sure it's going towards a logical conclusion. And then ultimately, when the meeting is over, make sure everybody understands what their tasks are, what is the follow-up, when is the next meeting, what is expected of them before the next meeting, etc. So simple thing, but given how much time we spend in meetings, it's really important to understand the rules and the etiquette behind holding effective and efficient meetings. So those were the tools and techniques that we use in the plan communications management process. We analyze requirements, we look at the methods, the technology, the models, and we have meetings. And that then all this planning activity actually leads to the communications management plan. Now, I've listed some of the things in the plan, but of course they are in the PMBOK. Make sure that you familiarize yourself with the broad contents. You don't have to mug up every word, but you should know what's in the communications plan, management plan. And why do I say this? Often in the exam, you will have questions, situational questions. And the answer is sometimes, in fact, often the communications management plan. Because remember, in PMBOK, a good project manager always anticipates. He always plans everything in advance. And so whenever any situation arises, you can always refer to the communications management plan or refer to whatever plan. So that's also true of communications management, also true of some of the situational questions that are asked in the exam. So I'm not going to read this out. I just wanted to point it out to you and tell you that it's an important document, and you should understand what it's used for and what the contents are. So that pretty much brings me to the end of this webinar. So just a brief recap of what we spoke about. I talked about the definition of project communications management, why it is so important, and I hope that my explanation made you understand that you do need to spend time planning. You cannot do it ad hoc. Always looking at it from the perspective of a very large multi-million-dollar, multi-country project, that the dimensions of communication activities, vertical, horizontal, official, unofficial, etc. We looked at communication types. We also looked at the overview of the three processes within plan, manage, and control communications. And we looked in some detail at the plan communications process. What do we need to consider? What are the inputs? We talked in detail about the tools and techniques, and we looked briefly at the most important output of this process, the communications management plan. And of course, we looked at the methods, the technologies, and the models of communications, which are used not only in the plan communications management process, but also in managed communications.
Thank you all for taking part in our presentation. If you have any questions or would like to get in touch with Ms. Suri, please email her at shabnam.suri@gmail.com. For more webinars, please visit our website at www.softexpert.com.